Serious rural folk, what is the most creepy thing you've seen or experienced? A bit late to this thread, but I've never had an opportunity to share this story. My wife and I met in a small rural town on Lake Superior, and when we were ready to move in together we purchased a remote cabin about 40 minutes out of town. It was an incredibly idyllic and peaceful existence for 2 years. When we decided it was time to move closer to family, we had packed all of our items except for 2 mason jars we had used for celebratory glasses of wine on our last night. When we woke up the next morning, both glasses were destroyed throughout our dining room. It was not like a normal fall with pieces of glass on the floor. There were shards in other rooms, on windowsills 10 feet away from the table, and some pieces of glass were ground into a fine powder. I cannot think of a logical explanation of what happened. Whatever would have created the force to do that damage to the glasses would have woken us up. I'm absolutely at a loss of what happened and still think about it frequently all these years later. The blood-curdling scream of something being killed by coyotes. Then all of a sudden it stops and there's dead silence. Just a few weeks ago just had a black snake wrapped on my outside doorknob. When I opened it, I guess it was trying to get to the nest of flycatchers beneath the porch roof. Rabbit getting killed by a predator is a terrifying noise. I grew up in the country, and after being shamed about being taunted for being scared of the dark, I decided I would just sit in the woods and kind of meditate to get over it. I heard this awful sound that scares the shit out of me. I talked to my friends that all hunted, and they let me know I heard a rabbit get killed. I wasn't sure if I should be comforted or horrified. Australia has a reputation for scary animals, but people don't ever talk about the sounds you hear. The cutest, most fluffy, sweet-faced little animals make demon noises in the dark. Our birds scream. Possums sound horror movie noises. Koalas sound like giant monsters. All of these are completely harmless. Generally the dangerous animals are, coincidentally, the ones you can't hear. I've done a job for a few years now noise monitoring. Generally of coal mines in rural areas obviously. My first night on the job, when I was 18 years, I was out by myself quietly listening to the mine from a dirt road near a farm property. Next minute I hear what sounds like a woman scream over and over and over. Didn't really know what to do, but noted it down as screaming and ducked off. When my boss read my notes he said, "Oh yeah, there's an owl that sounds like that. A ducking owl indistinguishable from a human scream. Unrelated. But the first time I heard a baby rabbit scream as it was taken by a fox, I could have sworn that it was someone getting done in." Anyway, my dad has a story about those owls. He was in his 20s and the early 70s and was staying at a married mate's place so they could do some rabbit shooting. They're in the country, middle of the night, and dad suddenly wakes up to the sound of a woman screaming. He jumps out of bed and finds the dude and his wife are already standing in the living room in their PJs and nightdress, worried looking, and then they all hear it again. He describes it like a horror movie scream. They're all convinced that someone is out there in the middle of Fleurieu Peninsula getting straight up murdered, and they hear it again. So dad and his mate grab their rifles, tell the wife to lock the doors behind them, and they head out. They're going to save this lady from whatever fate is befalling her. It's a clear night and the moon is near full. They're walking further and further away from the house and they're intermittently hearing this scream, but they can't pinpoint exactly where it's coming from because there's a bit of a breeze. They've been out there for a while. The scream, as though someone is getting stabbed, tortured, mutilated, is wearing them out, and they're getting jittery. How could this go on so long? How is she still alive? Is she still alive? They've started convincing themselves that something supernatural is going on. They turn around to go back to the house and call the cops. As they turned around they hear the scream from right above them, and there, standing in the moonlight, is a woman in a long nightgown, which is fluttering in the breeze. She reaches out to them. So, Dad's skeleton tries to exit his body and his mate had his rifle to his shoulder before he realized that his wife had gotten worried and followed them out. And that is the story of the screaming owl and how 2 dudes came close to shooting a woman while trying to save an imaginary one. I was in northern Wisconsin with my family as a kid. While I was up there I went on a little hike with my brother and dad. Just sorta going through some woods. Ended up emerging from them onto someone's property, and the dude there saw us. came up with his kid and asked the obvious, what you're doing on my property. My dad just apologized and said we were hiking and that he shouldn't have been so careless. We went back quickly, and while the encounter was odd, it didn't feel tense or anything. My brother and I also learned a good lesson about respecting private property. However, dude we encountered was apparently not satisfied. I get it to some degree. If I lived outside an urban area, I'd be sus to if someone emerges from the forest onto my property. Things got weird though. The guy we encountered actually got some goon who either worked for or was related to him to track us back to our cabin. About 5 minutes after we got back and started to make lunch, this goon literally walks inside the cabin and begins to talk about how we were caught trespassing. He wasn't yelling or angry or anything, but it was still pretty jarring having some camo wearing guy that you've never seen before to just barge into your grandparents' house. He didn't have a lot of time to say much because our grandparents owned a few guns, mostly antiques though, and sure enough one got pulled on him. Our grandma held this guy up and actually apologized again for the prior instance of trespassing. Then she started to yell at him though for following us, trespassing on our property, and straight up coming inside uninvited. And then he left. Was a really weird encounter. I've talked to my dad and brother about it on occasion though, so it wasn't a dream or my imagination. Either way, don't trespass. That's the lesson I learned. Edit. A lot of people are speculating that we stumbled on drugs or something, and to be honest I find that unlikely. The guy that talked to my dad gave his name. I certainly don't remember it though, and again had his own son with him. I think it's more likely we pissed off someone who values property and privacy and they overreacted greatly. Regardless, as others have noted, if you find yourself in a similar situation, remain polite, apologize, and get the duck out. I used to live in the desert for a year, and on nights, when the moon isn't out or there are clouds blocking out the stars and moon, it's almost pitch black. You can't see more than 10 yards ahead of you. One night I was driving down the highway going home, and then suddenly in my headlights I see a guy running on the side of the highway full on sprinting. I'm going 70 miles, so it's only for a second or two, but I'm like, what the heck was he running from? I hope he's okay, because I'm not pulling over laughing my butt off. But then maybe a minute later I see another guy in my headlights, only he's walking on the side of the highway. And I swear to God it looked like the same guy. Two separate guys in the dark walking, running on the side of the highway. What possible reason could explain that? I didn't see any cars on the side of the road that might have broken down. I was so weirded out I just had an uncomfortable feeling the entire ride home. A friend of mine lived in a semi-rural area growing up. One night the cops knocked on her door and warned her that they were looking for a possibly violent fugitive. Told her they'd check her property and that she should lock up and be wary. It wasn't until some time later that she found out the full story. The fugitive had been caught sexually assaulting a horse in a local stable. In the ensuing panic, the horse's leg was broken and the man got away. He was found 2 days later hiding in a storm-watered rain. When I was a child, 2 of my friends and I decided to explore around an abandoned house that was down the road from us. Typical abandoned house look, paint peeling off everywhere with exposed wood in some spots. Plants, vines overgrown. Broken windows. Roof tiles missing here and there. Well, we walked inside and it matched the outside. Cupboards broken. Floorboards splintered and cracked. Other than the place being extremely empty, we didn't really get any scary vibes from it. Nothing really stood out to us as paranormal as we'd expect. So we leave the house mildly disappointed. We are walking alongside of one of the windows when this very well-dressed, well-groomed man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a black dress coat, white shirt and black tie, comes into view. We didn't see him inside. Never heard anything. Yet here was this man just staring at us blankly through the window. Friends and I booked it as fast as we ever ran out of there and back home. It probably was just one of the property owners that just happened to be inside the same day we were there. Were a few rooms we didn't go in, but good God, that scared the shit out of us, lol. A few years later the local fire department burned the place down in a controlled burn. So if it was paranormal, well, it's gone now, lol. Grew up in a very rural area of Kentucky on a property that was about 75 combined acres of woods and empty fields out a dead end. 1-lane road. One night when I was a kid I was sent to take the trash out to the dumpster after dark. The dumpster was already at the bottom of the driveway. About the time I reached the dumpster I heard the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard. Like a woman was being brutally murdered right in my ear. I flew back to the house and had a full-on come apart, crying and telling my dad to get a gun. Fox screams will make your blood run cold. Rural Ohio. Went to visit a buddy who moved a couple hours away to another shithole town. Had another buddy B go with me. D takes B and I to meet a new friend of his. We'll get to his designation in a minute. Dude opens the door. Greets us. Seems normal for like 5 seconds. He was shirtless. But that's pretty common out here. Then the dude turns around as he waves us in. Massive ducking swastika tattoo across his entire back. Colored in with Confederate flag colors and patterns. It was at this moment B and I locked eyes and we knew what each other was thinking. Our lives might be in danger. So we follow this ducking Nazi. There it is through the house. Don't wanna be rude. We noticed that the carpet was supposed to be white, but it was more of a brown with a slight red tint to it. Place was a bit of a mess. We walk past his bathroom where his 14-year-old younger sister, we were all 19, was taking a shit with the door open and attempted to greet us mid-shit. At this point B and I were massively uncomfortable and a little creeped out by everything and everyone beneath this roof. Finally we get to the dude's room, and it was then when B and I looked at each other. We were both sweating profusely. Fear in our eyes. Ducking guns, man. Everywhere. Had to have been at least 30 guns all over his room. Stored improperly. Noticed a couple with the safeties off. Porn posters all over his walls. And of course some Nazi memorabilia. B called my cell from his pocket. To which I answered pretending it was my sister, and I acted as if a family emergency was happening and pretended to be distressed. Said I was sorry, but we needed to get back to town. We agreed to never ever visit Diver again. I don't know if this constitutes as creepy or horrifying, but to me, it started off creepy and got horrifying later on. Not all the terrifying things you might find in rural areas are weird animal or supernatural creature encounters. Sometimes the scary encounters you have are with other humans. And sometimes other humans can be incredibly creepy. Good idea you had to get out of there, though. I feel bad for the teen girl though. I doubt she had a great home life. Going off that small slice of it. Used to live in rural Philippines in a tiny fishing village in Tinambacan. Right next to our house was a fenced off lot that had been overgrown. And a really broken down house. It always looked really creepy at night, and kids in the neighborhood told me it was haunted. From our rooftop you could look into the lot. One night I was looking at it, and I saw a strange blue glow coming from inside, and shadows moving across the windows. I couldn't place it at all, and didn't hear any noise, no people speaking, or any indication of what was causing it. Really scared me. I brought it up to my family, and they told me drag queens were squatting there overnight, so that they could attend a nearby disco. So that was relieving. My uncle used live way out in the country on a plot he said was a little less than 8 acres. His closest neighbors weren't terribly far away, within quick driving distance, but also just far enough that walking wasn't very viable. Anyways, I spent my 8th grade summer there, and he had one story that scared the shit out of me back then. He had an array of animals on the farm: 3 hunting dogs, pigeons, dozens of chickens, other various birds, a few goats and a lone horse, and every night he would make his rounds through his farm, just to make sure everybody was where they were supposed to be, and that everything was locked up. One night as he's walking back to his house, his dogs start going wild. He initially doesn't give care to it, and continues on his way, but his dogs are just relentlessly barking. He points his flashlight around, and doesn't see anything. He gets to the back door of his house. His dog's still barking, and so he turns around one last time. Way out in his fields he says he does see what looks like a moving shadow. He automatically assumes it's a coyote or some other wild animal and just goes inside. The next night as he goes out to make his rounds, he said he was immediately stopped as he spotted some sort of shadowy figure just a little distance away from his barn. He didn't say anything, but he did take out his gun. Again, his initial thought was maybe a coyote trying to get his chickens. However, as he took a few steps, he said the figure suddenly stood up, almost human-like, and ran into the field, covered in darkness. He said he was so startled he just froze for a moment before yelling out, "Hey." He didn't give chase to whatever or whoever it was. He did say that for about a week after, his dogs would go ballistic at night, but he never saw the figure again. When he was telling me the story, he said that it probably could have just been a transient, but I don't know. The dude lived in the middle of nowhere and had to drive like 40 minutes to shop. Seems incredibly bizarre for some random homeless to even be in that area. He said it could have also been a black bear, but I don't know either. He wasn't even close to the kind of area I would think black bears inhabit. Dude lived in a rural country farming area, not anywhere remotely close to mountains, forests, etc. My brother and I were home alone watching TV. He had an inflatable, life-size Stone Cold wrestler in the basement. When you punched it, it would pop back up and say things like "'Cause Stone Cold says so." So we are watching TV, and we know it's just us at home when suddenly we hear "'Cause Stone Cold says so" coming from the basement. Very creepy since the thing wouldn't talk on its own. Something had to have moved it, and we were home alone. We both just looked at each other and ran downstairs to see what was happening. My dog had Stone Cold horizontal by the waist, and poor Stone Cold was rapidly deflating. Water from the bottom weight dripping into the carpet like clear, white blood. My dog's eyes were glazed over from the glory of the kill, and he'd periodically give Stone Cold another shake for good measure. You see, my brother had been chasing my dog with Stone Cold for about 2 weeks, and my dog was very afraid of this inflatable man. I only wish I'd seen him working up the nerve to approach and kill him. R.I.P. inflatable Stone Cold. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.